You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 163. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Here's a question for you. Who in your life do you find it stressful to deal with? This could be somebody at work. It could be somebody outside of work. And whenever you interact with this person, you find yourself saying things that you might later regret. You might find yourself getting a bit uncomfortable. Maybe you feel frustrated. Maybe you feel like they're frustrated with you. Maybe you spend a lot of time after interacting with this person ruminating, thinking about the things that you said and didn't say, and it can be really distracting, and you may not feel very good about it. If you can relate, and my guess is that if you're human and you're interacting with other humans at work and outside of work, then this is something that you might want some help with. I know for the clients that I work with, this is something that has come up a number of times recently. Questions about dealing with difficult people in their practice and how they can deal with it in the moment, how they can take care of themselves after the fact. If that's something that you can relate to, then this podcast episode is 100% for you. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm thrilled to have you here this week. So what is the problem here that we are dealing with, that you are dealing with? Well, chances are there are people that you're interacting with where you find it really stressful. So with lawyers that I've worked with, there are a number of personalities that fit within this equation. Sometimes it's one of your clients. You may be working with somebody who is in a very difficult position in their life. For all of you litigators, I used to litigate. I have had that experience. For your client, they're in the middle of something that is really challenging. They're either having to sue somebody or they're in the process of being sued. They are spending money on this. They have uncertainty of outcome, and they're looking to you to help them solve this problem. Chances are it's taking a lot longer than they expected that it would. Chances are there's a lot more involvement on their part in terms of disclosure of documents, attending for discoveries, waiting for trial dates, all the different steps that they need to go through, and it's difficult for them. They may have a challenge in their family. It might be that you're a family lawyer and they're fighting over custody for their kids and who gets to spend the summer with them or Christmas with them or the holidays with them. And they bring their real problems to you and you're trying to help them solve those problems. And there's a real emotional weight that gets put on your shoulders as you're trying to help your clients navigate their problems. Now, it could also be that you have clients who are a little bit difficult in terms of their personalities. They might have really high expectations, unrealistic expectations about how long things are going to take, how much things are going to cost, the way that the system works. And all of this becomes a problem that you take on yourself. Now, sometimes the problem stems from people who are outside of your organization, right? We can think of lawyers on the other side of files that we've worked with in the past. And for some of them, it almost seems like they are trying to get under your skin, right? You see their name appear in your inbox and your heart skips a beat and you think, oh, do I really have to deal with an email from so-and-so today? Or maybe it's that every time they call you, there's a new problem or the way that they speak to you, or there's a condescending tone that they take with you and it just gets under your skin. Sometimes the problem isn't coming from outside of the firm or the organization. Sometimes it's somebody that you work with really closely. And I've seen this with lawyers who have people who they report to, whether it's lawyers within their organization or management within their organization, where there's a tension, right? There's this challenge in terms of communication. You don't really speak the same language. You're not really on the same page. You find that whenever you speak with this person, you find that you're doubting yourself. You find that they seem to be questioning you. You might find that even the way that you interact with each other isn't particularly friendly or effective. And it can take your mind away from the work that you have on your desk into a place where you're ruminating over the conversation. You're trying to figure out if you said the right thing or the wrong thing or what happened here. It can be really distracting and difficult. And sometimes it's a situation where you're the person in authority at work and you've delegated a project to another lawyer. You've delegated a project to support your assistant, a paralegal. And what you find is that the work product that is coming back isn't to standard. It's not something that you can readily use. And then you're having multiple conversations trying to address the same problem. Things aren't really getting solved, and it can lead to these feelings of frustration. So these are all some examples where you may be interacting with other people, and the way that you might describe this to yourself is that it feels very stressful, right? These are difficult people. These are people with unreasonable expectations. These are people who are very stressful to be around. Whatever language that you would use to describe them, that is the situation that we're dealing with today. And what I'm offering to you today is some tools, some strategies to help you deal with this. Because what I've heard from lawyers recently is that these interactions are really challenging. It is leaving you feeling really depleted, possibly even burnt out. And what you want is a strategy to deal with this going forward so that you can better navigate these relationships, so that you can better take care of yourself. Now, to begin with, I wish that I could say that there was a magic solution, that you could somehow avoid people who you find difficult or stressful to deal with, and that your life could be full of interactions with only the most amazing aligned people who you speak with, you feel amazing about. They build your confidence. They make you feel good. They make you feel appreciated, validated, like you're on the right track. Those interactions are essential. I hope that you're having those as well as the difficult conversations or the difficult interactions in your work. But the reality of it, from what I've experienced, from what I've seen, is that there are always going to be people in your life who are going to be somewhat difficult for you to interact with. And this is true in your professional life. It's also true in your personal life. You may find that there are family members or friends or people who just seem to appear regularly in your life, where maybe it's a little bit difficult for you to interact with them. Something that they say will trigger you. You find you're not your best self around them. So the strategies that we're going to talk about today will apply to them as well. And the reason that it's important for us to find some strategies is that it can be so distracting. I mentioned this just a moment ago, right? When you have a difficult conversation and you go back to your desk and you find yourself replaying the conversation over and over again in your head, trying to imagine what you could have said differently. Sometimes you even think about, I should have said this other thing. That would have been really great. And instead of focusing on things that are productive, things like your work, things like developing good, strong relationships with people who are valuing your services, who make you feel good, you spend this mental space thinking about this other relationship, and it pulls you away from what really matters. And what you may find is that your coping mechanisms aren't really taking you to the place that you want to be. So, for example, you may find that you complain, right? I mean, maybe initially you're just kind of complaining to yourself, but then maybe you find that you're venting a little bit with your partner or with somebody at work, or I don't know, maybe even somebody who's happens to cross your path at the coffee shop. You're explaining this situation and it's like you're trying to explain it. You're trying to make sense of it. And what you might notice is that over time, you keep having the same conversation. And even you are noticing that this is a repetitive pattern and there just doesn't seem to be a solution to it. And so you may find that you're venting, you may be ruminating, again, spending a lot of time in your head. Again, you might feel that your energy is really getting drained. You might start feeling really distracted. You may find that it no longer feels sustainable. And so this can really impact you in terms of how you feel about your job. I have known lawyers who have switched working environments in order to move themselves away from a particular person. They may switch out of a particular practice area because they find the nature of the work is too intense, right? That they take on a lot of the challenges that their clients are having. For some lawyers, it may even mean leaving the practice of law. So this is a really serious problem for a lot of people. And so we want to equip you with some of the tools that you can use to deal with these situations. So as the title of this podcast episode suggests, the very first tool that I would love to offer you is the idea of expecting and accepting. Yes, that is exactly it. Expecting and accepting. So when you are practicing as a lawyer, you can expect that you will have clients that are your dream clients. Every interaction with them feels amazing. You feel validated. You feel like you're contributing. You feel like you're helping them. And you're also going to have clients who are going to be difficult in your eyes, right? In your experience. They're going to question every step along the way. They're going to get on the phone with you and they're going to go well beyond the conversation that may be necessary for you to engage in your work. They may not do the things that you ask them to do. They may not produce the documents. They may not produce the information. You might find yourself chasing them for whatever it is that you need. And so what I would invite you to think about at this point, and this is not to say if there are any clients who are listening, this is not to say that all clients fall into this category or that all clients fall into this category at all times. This is simply to say that we can expect that the people that we work with are going to be going through challenging times. They probably don't understand the legal system unless they're clients whose job it is to deal with litigation mandates, or if they've gone through a number of transactions, this is something they're super familiar with. Your clients aren't necessarily going to be well-versed in the processes that you are involved in as a lawyer, so we can expect that from them. So again, that expectation. We can also expect when you're dealing with opposing counsel that their job isn't to make you feel good about yourself. And in fact, some of them may see their job as making you not feel good about yourself. And so when you get those emails, when you get those letters, when they have picked apart your argument, when they have said something that makes you question what you just did, then we can assume, we can expect that that is how they are going to be, that not all of them are going to fit into that category, but we can expect that we will have difficult opposing counsel at various times in our careers. We can also expect that within the organization that we're working in, that there are going to be individuals who are absolute gems, rock stars, mentors, the people that we turn to help us solve our problems. And we can also expect that there are going to be some rockier relationships, right? There are going to be some lawyers who you report to where you're not going to have that synergy, right? You're not going to see the world through the same pair of eyes that they see the world. And there's going to be some gaps. So we can expect that it's not always going to be unicorns and rainbows. We can also expect that when we are delegating to others, that it's not always going to be a seamless exchange. So the first tool that I would love to offer to you is to lower your expectations. If your expectations are super high, that everything's going to be amazing and rosy 100% of the time, let's reframe or let's recalibrate the expectation so that we are not surprised when the client is really upset and we are having a difficult conversation with them. We expect that that is going to happen. And the second part of that, accept, right? The acceptance of the reality, right? The proven reality, whatever that proof looks like for you in your particular practice, that this is going to happen. One of the places that we can burn a lot of our energy is when we resist reality. And there is a quote that I love. It is from a woman named Byron Katie. And she talks about how you can argue with reality and you will only lose 100% of the time. So there is no point. It is totally futile to argue or resist what is happening in front of you. If you've got somebody who is explosive and you're on the phone with them and they are really explaining themselves in a passionate way and they are using language that is really maybe even alarming to you, that is the reality. And there is nothing that we can do about the way that other people are going to speak, the way that they're going to act, the way that they're going to feel. We only have control over ourselves. And so that very first step is simply to expect that these things are going to happen and accept the reality of them. In the moment, we're going to accept the reality of them. Now, I will say that there are exceptions, right? And I'll get to this in the third kind of strategy offering that I have to share with you today, which is that if you're in a situation where a person is being abusive with you, right, where they have crossed over a line, then acceptance doesn't mean accepting over the long term and saying, yes, I'm going to stay in this situation where I'm very unhappy. This person is treating me very poorly. That's where we want to bring boundaries in. That's where we want to bring support in. But when we're talking about the day-to-day conversations that are a little bit difficult, that can be stressful, and these aren't necessarily ongoing relationships, and these aren't abusive relationships, put it that way. These are conversations with people who themselves are undergoing difficult situations, and we are trying to learn as lawyers how to manage those relationships. That's what we're talking about here. That's where we want to take away that layer of resistance, right? That voice in your head that's saying this shouldn't be happening, because it is happening. And so we're going to accept it, and that is going to prepare us for the next step, which is to have a process. So if we know already that there are going to be individuals in our lives who are challenging for us to deal with, and sometimes these are, as I said at the beginning, not necessarily people at work, but people who are really close to you. I mean, this could be one of your children, right? Where you know that there are situations where they are going to explode, right? You can anticipate this is something they're not going to like. They're going to throw a tantrum. Again, the same analysis applies, right? We can expect that it's going to happen. We can accept that it's going to happen, right? I think when we look at children, for example, and they do something, they say something, and we disapprove, right? We think it's inappropriate. And yet what we're doing is we're measuring that child against the standard of who you are, right? I am a 47-year-old woman. I'm educated. I've been trained as a coach. I can't go measuring what a 2-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old even, I can't measure the way that they are speaking with me by the standard that I might apply to myself. And all that being said, there are moments where as a 47-year-old woman, I'm not necessarily saying the things or acting in the way that I would most like to be doing that. So I think we have to give everybody some grace that they are doing their best, and sometimes their best comes across as being a little bit challenging. So with that, what we want to do is have a way that we are going to handle the situation. So here, what I'd love to offer to you is a protocol that is based on a goal-setting formula that I love to use with my clients, because it's simple, it gives you prompts, and once you go through it, you'll have a very clear idea of what it is that you would like to do. And I have a podcast episode where I talk about this framework. It's episode number 6. So you can go back to that episode. I'm going to walk you through it in this episode using as an example a difficult conversation. So imagine that you have somebody, and you may have somebody in mind if you're listening to this episode and you're specifically trying to figure out how you're going to engage with this person in the future. So have that idea in mind, whether it's opposing counsel, whether it's a member of your own team, whether it's a client that you're struggling to get on the same footing as, and we're going to walk through a number of questions. So we follow what is called the GREAT goal framework. GREAT is an acronym, GREAT, and there's an exclamation point at the end, and I'll tell you what each of those letters stands for. So first we start with the goal. What is the goal? When you step into a conversation with somebody and you find that it's an activating conversation, right? They're saying things, or they are very stressed themselves, or they're angry and they're upset. The first question to ask yourself is, what is your goal for yourself in the context of this particular conversation? And what you might decide your goal is that you are going to stay calm. You are going to stick to the facts. You are going to keep the conversation brief, right? If you have a client who you know is going to call you and that conversation could go on for a very long time and you're losing a lot of your work time and it's not moving the file forward, it's not serving the client, That might be one of your objectives, is that you're going to keep the conversation brief. Your goal might be to obtain the information that is required. Your goal might be to reassure the other person that everything is going to be okay. So your exercise for that first letter, G, is to think about what goal you have for the conversation. Once you've decided what the goal is, you're going to ask yourself what the reason is. Why is it important? What about this goal is important to you? So let's think about what some of those goals or those reasons might be for the goal that you've set for yourself. So one of the reasons is, well, I know this is going to continue to happen. I'm going to continue to have exchanges with humans on this planet as long as I'm working and living. And so one of the reasons that this is important to me is that I want to develop my skills as a lawyer, as an advocate, as a person who wants to have good, decent relationships with other people. I want to learn how to manage myself in these difficult conversations. The reason may also be because you want to achieve the ideal best outcome for your client, and having these conversations is going to help you achieve those outcomes, whether the conversation is with your client themselves, or maybe this is a conversation with opposing counsel or somebody on your team. You want to serve your client, and this is a conversation that will get you there. You might think about how learning the art of this difficult conversation makes you a more effective lawyer, a more effective advocate. You might think about how the skills that you're being required to use are making you stronger as a person. Now, this is one of the most annoying truths about dealing with people who you find stressful, is that there's something there that you have yet to learn. This is what I have experienced since becoming a coach, in particular for myself and for my clients, is that when you find a person stressful in your eyes, they are stressful, there is something there that is bothering you. And what is really fascinating is that you will find people throughout your life, work life, non-work life, who bring up a very similar feeling, a very similar challenge. So ask yourself who that person or what that type of person is for you. And my guess is that there is an underlying common current, a theme, and that is where you have work to do. And that work may be developing your boundaries more clearly. It may be asserting yourself more effectively. It may be developing your internal sense of self-confidence so that you're not relying on them to provide that for you. So watch for this, right? As you're identifying some of those difficult conversations, look at what it is that is difficult about that conversation, and that might tie it back to the reason. What is important to you about the goal that you've set for how you want to be in this conversation? It might be a really personal, like a deep goal that you can work towards. So that's your second step. So we're in the GREAT model. So we've done a goal, we've come up with a reason. And then the next step is to identify the E. E stands for energy. You could also sub in emotion. So when you think about yourself having this difficult interaction, you feel yourself getting activated, you're getting a little bit annoyed. Maybe your normal reaction is to retaliate or explode or answer in kind. Or maybe your reaction typically is to shut down, to be very quiet. Maybe your tendency is simply to start speaking and you don't really know what you're speaking about. You just know that you're saying words. So think about what your normal response is when you feel like you're on the spot. And instead of just reacting to it, we're going to be intentional and think about how you want to be in that moment in advance. And this is a little bit like if you were ever to train for the Olympics, or if you're training for a sporting event, you often hear of athletes who imagine themselves crossing the finish line, having the perfect tennis swing, hitting the ball with a bat, and it's a home run. So this is your chance to use your imagination to create in your mind's eye a video footage reel of how it is that you want to carry yourself in that conversation. So what does that look like? Well, chances are you stay calm, right? So maybe your energy is calm. Maybe you want to stay grounded. present. You may want to channel curiosity, right? Instead of defensiveness or fear or anger or frustration, maybe you can find curiosity. What is it that is upsetting this other person? What is it that is so challenging for this other person that you are not seeing? So this is an exercise for you to identify what you want to feel, what emotion you want to experience, that you want to exude, the energy that you want to bring to a conversation like that. And I love this part of the model. It's not typically what lawyers would first start with. I think for many of us who have been trained as lawyers, the first thing we want to look at are the facts. We want to look at the logical conclusion, what is fair, what is reasonable. But here we're focusing on something that we don't necessarily give our attention to, which is the emotion. And yet, whenever you're dealing with another human, that emotion is powerful. It is part of the unspoken communication. And when you can exude calm, even when the person who you're speaking with is in a state of chaos, in a state of high stress, then you are the one who gets to bring the tone of that conversation to a more level experience for both of you. So the emotion is key here. So we've got the goal, the reason, the energy. Then we look at the actions, right? What action steps are you going to take within that context in order to achieve the goal that you want? So if you think about actions, some of the actions may be preemptive. So if you're thinking about a client that you work with, for example, you might be really clear at the outset of what their expectations can be. That includes a clear delineation of what your roles are within the relationship. If you have a client who's never worked with a lawyer before and they think that they can call you and talk to you like you are their counselor, and I've had lawyers who have told me that this is what their clients do, which is why I'm using it as an example, and then they do not want to pay legal fees for those conversations, then it may be necessary for you at the outset to explain to the client that the way that your system works, the way that your invoicing works, is that you charge by the hour and that the conversations that you have are charged by the hour. And so they are welcome to contact you and have a conversation about X, Y, Z, but that is going to be considered part of the fee, right? So they have a clear understanding of what that is. And that may or may not disincentivize the client from having those conversations with you. Now, you might also tell them that your area of expertise is in assisting them with X. And so you will take it upon yourself to ensure or try to ensure that the conversations stay on track. Now, it may mean that you need to say this explicitly. It may mean that within the conversation, you are doing that. You're guiding the conversation. And I know that you are able to find ways to do this tactfully so that the person that you're speaking with may not even realize that that's what you're doing with them, right? I mean, sometimes if it's a message that we think might offend them, then maybe we want to say it in a way that is really tactful and allows them to feel confident that you are focused on their best interests and that their best interests mean, let's keep these conversations focused. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. If you have any questions about that, let's talk about that. If you find that the conversation is drifting, then you might bring the conversation back, right? Hey, I noticed, we're here to talk about getting you ready for your discovery. This conversation that we're having is leading us in this other direction. How about we wrap that part of the conversation up and focus over here? So you want to set the expectation with your clients in terms of what they can expect from you as their lawyer. You also may want to set the expectation for what the whole process involves. So again, if you've got sophisticated clients who have done the thing that you're doing before, you're a deal lawyer, there are certain steps, there are certain timelines, expectations, information you're going to need from them, etc. They may already know this. You may have a conversation at the beginning. Hey, have you done this before? Because here's what you can expect. If they haven't done it before, they'd probably really appreciate you walking them through what the process looks like. This is probably something that is extremely familiar to you. You've done it a million times before, but they may be doing it for the first time. So you can set the expectation. So getting back to our model, we're looking at actions that you can take. So setting clear expectations. If this is somebody that you work with, you might get really clear expectations in terms of what they can expect from you or clear expectations about what you would like to see from them. And then we put ourselves within the context of the conversation itself. So if things are going a little bit sideways, what are some of the things that you want to do? So maybe it's staying calm. Maybe it's focusing on asking questions. It might be pausing, right? If you know that your tendency is to blurt out the first thing that comes to mind and it's not always the thing that makes the most sense, you might pause. You may need to tell the person that you're speaking with, hey, let me just think about that for a moment so that they understand that that's what you're doing. You're pausing. It may be that the conversation simply isn't going anywhere. And so the action step may be, hey, listen, this is something that I think we would both benefit from taking a break from and coming back to later. How about we revisit this in an hour or tomorrow or something like that? So the A is for you to decide what action steps you want to take in that conversation. And action steps can include the things that you want to do, like stay calm. It might include take a deep breath. And it might also include the things that you are not going to do. I am not going to start talking if I don't really know what I want to say. I'm not going to raise my voice. I'm not going to speak too fast, whatever it happens to be for you. And it might also include some of the things that you do or don't do after the fact, right? If you know that the conversation is going to be really difficult for you and you have that sort of post-conversation rumination or second guessing yourself, or maybe you even beat yourself up or you feel really badly, maybe there's a process that you have for yourself to take care of yourself after those conversations, right? If you have one of those conversations, another action step might be, I'm going to go for a walk around the block. I'm going to write in a journal about how I feel about the conversation. I'm going to call someone who's close to me and have a brief chat with them just to kind of get it off my chest. So what are the action steps that you're going to take in the various stages of that conversation? So we've talked about the pre, the during, and the after. That brings us to T. And the T stands for time. And what I love about time is that for anything that we do that has a finite amount of time attached to it, which is pretty much everything, we can reduce the difficulty or the dread that we associate with that thing by simply putting it in a container of time. So that difficult conversation, that exchange, it might be 30 seconds. It might be 5 minutes. Whatever that amount of time is, it isn't going to be forever. And so you can tell yourself in advance, this is only something temporary. This is going to be 2 minutes, 5 minutes. I can get through these 5 minutes and then I can go on and do the next thing, or I can process it, or I can take the next step. So when you contain it in time, it's a lot more manageable. And then finally, that last part of the model is an exclamation point. And that is where you can ask yourself what obstacles might stand in your way when it comes to implementing this protocol for your goal. So it might be, well, I get so worked up when I'm having these conversations that I lose my ability to think straight. That could be a real obstacle. So you might want to plan for that. You might want to build in some extra time for yourself. Another obstacle might be that you have no control over when these conversations are going to take place. So maybe there is some control that you have, right? Maybe there's somebody who calls you and you know that when they call you that typically it's going to be a difficult conversation. So maybe let it go to voicemail and you call them back a few minutes later once you've had the chance to prepare mentally for that conversation. So that wild card is simply an opportunity for you to do some obstacle forecasting, because the obstacle is a way for you to figure out your best plan for success going forward. So taking a step back in terms of where we are in today's conversation, first we started out by talking about strategy number 1, which is we're going to expect that we're going to have difficult conversations. There are going to be stressful people in our lives, at work, outside of work. And so we are going to expect that is going to happen. We are going to accept that that is going to happen. We're not going to resist it, say it shouldn't be happening. We just know it is going to happen. The second step is that we are going to establish a protocol using the GREAT goal model. So goal, reason that it's important, the energy that we want to bring, the action steps we're going to take, the time it's going to take, and we're going to identify obstacles that is going to be a strategy that you can use to prepare for these types of conversations, to deal with these types of conversations going forward. And then I said there was a third strategy. And the third strategy really is to seek out the support that you need, right? So if what you find is that you have a really difficult practice, I know this happens for family lawyers and criminal lawyers and a number of state litigators, like the nature of what you're doing can be really, really difficult, right? The subject matter that you're dealing with, the emotions that you deal with can run really high. Now, this isn't to say that if you're in a commercial context that you don't have these same stressful conversations. Chances are you do, and the nature of the stress might be different, right? It might not be somebody is stressed because their children are going to be with their ex-partner for the holidays and it's really killing them inside. It might be more that there's a deal, there's a lot at stake, and things are falling apart, and your client is carrying a lot of stress, and that stress is being transferred to you. There's really tight deadlines. Things are moving really quickly. There's a million documents that need to be updated every time that somebody changes a date or a dollar value or a decision. So whatever area you happen to be practicing in, there are going to be these really stressful, difficult conversations that you're going to be experiencing. And so what I'm inviting for you is that you have a plan to take care of yourself. Now, self-care might be in the nature of simply caring for your health, right? It might be proper nutrition, exercise, sleep, the basics, the occasional trip to get a massage or whatever it happens to be. And I've done a whole episode about sustainable self-care, so you can look that up for some ideas. It may also mean having additional support, right? If you find that your mental health is starting to suffer, right? That you're feeling exceptional levels of anxiety, stress, burnout, and I say exceptional, but really it doesn't have to be exceptional. I mean, if you're feeling stress and anxiety and burnout at a level that is impacting you, where you're starting to feel concerned and you think that it would be helpful to reach out for help, 100%, I would encourage you to go and find somebody in your area who can help you, whether it's a counselor or a therapist. Often you might find that there are lawyers who have shifted from practicing law to supporting lawyers with their mental health. 100%, I would reach out for help from somebody who has that training. You can reach out to a coach, somebody like me who can help you to navigate these difficult conversations, to navigate whether there are bigger transitions that are required for you, which brings me to the next point in the self-care or the strategy part of this is that if you are dealing with individuals on a regular basis, if these are people who are at your work and what you're finding is that these relationships are becoming really difficult for you. Some people use the word toxic, so that might be how you feel about it. And this is no longer a sustainable environment for you to be in or a healthy environment to be in, then it might help to talk to somebody to help you move yourself out of that particular situation. And some telltale signs that it might be a sign to move on is, if you feel yourself feeling really down about going to work, if you find that your self-confidence is feeling really impacted, if you're not feeling supported where you are, if you're not feeling valued where you are, if you don't feel like there's a future where you are, these are all signs that maybe things where you aren't the most supportive and the healthiest environment for you, in which case it might be time for you to think about making a move to a different environment. And another thing that I'll just add here is that boundaries are also important to set. So going back to what I mentioned at the beginning here, is that yes, we can expect to deal with people who are in really stressful situations, who may not be at their best. They're not regulating themselves in the way that maybe you would like them to, or that they would like themselves to regulate. And so boundary setting is one of the things that you will likely need to do, right? I've had conversations back when I was a lawyer in particular. I remember having a really interesting conversation with one of my mentors because the client was speaking to me in a way that was not really appropriate, right? They'd crossed a line in terms of the relationship between client and lawyer and the expectations that they had and just the way that they were speaking to me. And my mentor really stood up for me and said, this is not the kind of interactions that we need to have with our clients. We don't have to tolerate this kind of behavior or whatever you want to call it. And so boundaries can be really important. And to set those boundaries, sometimes you can do that on your own. Sometimes you can identify where you need to draw the line and then communicate that to whoever it is that you feel needs to hear it. And sometimes it helps to do that with the assistance of somebody within your organization, right? There might be somebody in HR who can help you if it's something that's internal. If it's a client that you're struggling with, you can reach out to another lawyer, you can reach out to a mentor and say, hey, listen, here's what's going on. I would like to have a conversation with this person where I set some boundaries. Can you help me figure out how to do that? So you don't need to do this alone. And I would highly encourage you to get support so that you develop the tools, so that you have the support that you need in order to deal with these types of conversations, right? We can expect they're going to happen. It doesn't mean that we have to resign ourselves to being somebody else's punching bag, right? For lack of a better way to describe it. Hopefully that's not the role that you're playing, but if that's how you feel, we want to find a way to not be doing that over an extended period of time, right? If it's a one-off, it's a opposing counsel and it's one of those situations. No, that probably isn't acceptable. And, we would have to talk about this on a case-by-case basis, but there's a difference here that I'm trying to illustrate, which is that there's one-offs and then there's an environment that is consistent. And so we really want to make sure that you're not putting yourself in an environment where this is the norm, this is something that you're experiencing in the day-to-day. So going back then, taking a step back, when you take this approach, right? When you've got this proactive idea, you're expecting that there's going to be these challenging interactions, you've got a plan for it, you know that you've got the support you need. If you need to leave that situation, you're doing that. The reason this is going to work is that what you're doing here is you're no longer putting the focus on the other person and what they need to change about themselves, although in some situations, they will be the ones who need to change, right? But what we're focusing on here is you, right? You are the common denominator in all of these conversations, all of these interactions. And so we're focusing on you, and that is where you have the most power. And now you've got a strategy, right? You've got some ideas in terms of what you can do to feel more in control and less vulnerable to how other people are feeling and acting. And there's this really wonderful advice that I heard from a good friend of mine. She's a lawyer. She's one of these people who just seems to float above the fray. She's really amazing. And she has a gift for dealing with situations where she's got difficult clients or difficult lawyers that she's working with. And it just seems to be like water off a duck's back. It's amazing. And so I asked her about that one day. I was like, well, what are your thoughts about this? How do you deal with this? And she said, someone once told me that when you're dealing with a person and they are rude to you or short with you, or they say something that really doesn't sit well with you, 99% of the time, it is a reflection of that person, not of you. And so that might be something helpful for you to keep in mind, that if you're interacting with individuals and these are really, really difficult, stressful interactions, that you are not the only one, and this is not a reflection of you, it's a reflection of them. So what are some of the skills that you may need in order to implement and develop your strategies, your toolbox when it comes to these stressful situations? Well, number one is a willingness to practice, right? In the words of a lawyer that I was speaking with recently about this topic, his response was amazing. So what you're saying is, I need to develop the skill of getting really good at dealing with difficult people. And 100%, that's what it is. It's a willingness to develop the skill of dealing with these difficult situations. It also means taking care of yourself, right? It means putting yourself into the context and thinking about how you can support yourself, both in terms of the strategy that you bring to the table, but also what support you might need independently of that, what support you have within the organization that you're working in. So that is the next thing, is that you need to be willing to take care of yourself. And the other part of it is that, it may also mean that you're learning a number of new skills, right? So it might be developing the skill of thinking quickly on your feet, of identifying the types of boundaries that you want to set and then articulating those boundaries. It might be developing your internal sense of self-confidence so that you have that confidence when it comes time to actually implement some of the tools that you're using to assert those boundaries, and not to take on that stress from the other person, to maintain composure for yourself. So as a result, we cannot, sadly, make these difficult conversations go away, but we can help you develop the skills that you need in order to deal with it. And what that means for you is that you're going to develop your skills. You're going to feel more confident. Those conversations may continue to happen, but they will feel less stressful for you. You will feel like you've got the tools that you need. You're developing your ability to deal with those conversations. You're developing your ability to bounce back. You've got the support that you need to move forward. And so that means that you are able then to spend less time thinking about those conversations, ruminating over those conversations, doubting yourself because of those conversations. And instead, you are spending more of your time focused on growth, focused on your practice, focused on the relationships with people who help you feel validated, who appreciate what you do. And that overall is going to enhance the experience that you have both inside of your work, in your professional life, but also outside of work. So with that, my friend, I hope that today's episode has helped you, that you have identified for yourself how you're going to deal with your next difficult conversation. This might be something that even becomes almost like, I'm not going to say fun because that would really be a stretch, but it can become something that is a challenge, that you're taking on a skill that you're willing to develop, and you're going to see the impact of developing those skills. So once again, as you know, I do work with lawyers individually. I work with lawyers in groups. And if you have any questions about that, if you would like to work on your skills, if you've got some difficult, stressful relationships and you'd like to figure out how to address those proactively, by all means, please feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on my websites. It's not hard to do. And I would just really love to hear from you. So I hope you have a beautiful week, and I'll look forward to reconnecting soon. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.